Well, I am so excited about this week that we are about to enter into. We're going to look at the subject of mentorship. This is week number 9, chapter number 8, entitled Mighty Mentors. We're going to look at the story of David and Joab. Now, at my home that is not too far away from the studio I'm sitting in, I have a 17-acre lake. It's a part of our neighborhood, and only the people that live there can fish in it. And I about 2 years ago bought a little 2-man boat. It's about 10 foot long. It's got little pontoons on the side. It's pretty neat. And I actually joined a couple of Facebook pages. One's called Tiny Boat Nation, and there's several others. And you just absolutely cannot believe what men do to these small boats. The very first thing they do, though, is they usually jettison the second seat, so that they can put more equipment, they can put platforms in, or whatever. One day I was looking at my boat and thinking about doing some changes, and I actually felt the Spirit of God say to me, I don't ever want you to get rid of your second seat. Now, I think that was both practical and spiritual. On the practical side, I love to invite other men to come and fish with me. Now, it's usually harder because most of the time they really don't know what they're doing, and a lot of lines get caught in trees and snagged on other things. There are fishing lures and hooks flying everywhere. I usually don't catch as many fish when I'm not by myself. But it's amazing the conversations you can have when you're out on the water. I believe that there's a clear call in Scripture to always have a second seat in the boat of our lives, and that seat in particular should have a mentor in it. Let me read you a verse, Ecclesiastes 4, 9 and 10, and verse 12. It says, 2 people are better than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but 2 can stand back to back and conquer. 3 are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Like I said a moment ago, one of the most important people you can have in the second seat of your life is that of a mentor. Now, David had many mentors, but none of them were more important than the extremely complicated relationship that he had with a man named Joab. Joab is the brother of Abishai that we studied in chapter 5, and he is one of the greatest warriors in the story of David, and he is the top commander of Israel's army. The stories of Joab are fierce and wild. The Bible is honest about both the strength of this man and the character downfall of this man. Yet there's truly a divine affiliation between Joab and David. Joab would not be the mentor that David always wanted, but he would be the one that he needed. And this would be the man that on multiple occasions would step into the most painful and character-destroyed moments of David's life. Joab was a mentor to David, even though at times David didn't want one. Most of these Joab moments, they would happen in the worst times of David's leadership. And yet Joab would step up while others were only comforting, and Joab would be a voice of confrontation. It was Joab who stood in the middle of the consequences of David's sin and said what needed to be said. And so when we study the life of Joab and the story of Joab and David, I believe that a little bit of theological grace is appropriate because this man, although he had major character issues, he also had great strength. We first see Joab's mentorship with David in 2 Samuel 12. We actually just looked at this last week. You know the story. David has fallen with Bathsheba, and he's been out of the battle for 2 years. And who calls the king back into war? None other but Joab, knowing that David needed the win. 2 Samuel 12, verses 27 through 28. Joab sent messengers to David. I have fought against Rabbah and captured its water supply. Now bring the rest of the army and capture the city. Otherwise, I will capture it and get credit for the victory. So Joab knew that David needed the win worse than he did. So what does Joab do? He mentors the king back into the battle. Another major mentorship moment for Joab is found in 2 Samuel 19. Now, so much happens between 2 Samuel 12 and 19. Because of David's sin, Absalom, his son, actually goes into rebellion. Now, it's not all because of David, but Absalom actually causes a civil war. That's how bad his rebellion is. In fact, he tries to take the very kingdom of Israel that God gave David away from his father. In fact, he almost succeeds. In one battle alone, 20,000 Israelite soldiers are killed. There's a massive, bloody civil war, and somebody needs to do something about it. The conflict is destroying the nation from within. But then at a peak moment, a strange moment, Absalom is captured. The Bible actually says that he gets his beautiful hair caught in a tree. He's hanging there by his hair, but the men of Israel, the soldiers still loyal to David, they are afraid to kill Absalom. Joab comes up and sees this scene, and he actually says that, what are we doing? We should stop this right now. And he orders the death of Absalom. It is literally and figuratively the dagger of Joab that kills David's son. David's men, they begin to rejoice because the conflict is over. Israel can now begin to heal, but the king has lost a son. Right at this moment of studying David's story, I was really feeling the weight of it. David's story is not simple, and the Bible is very honest about every aspect of it. There is a massive royal complication going on, and there are massive ramifications even for you and I today. And in this moment, I really was overwhelmed with the story of David. These are king-size things going on, and Joab is right in the center of it. 2 Samuel 18:33 from the Amplified Bible. It says, the king was deeply moved, overcome with emotion, another version says. And he went to the upper room over the gate, and he wept in sorrow. And this is what he said as he walked, and he was heard by others. Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, how I wish I had died instead of you, oh, Absalom, my son. 1 Samuel 19:2 says that all of the people of Israel heard the deep grief of this king for the son. The next verse tells us that soldiers that had fought for David in that very civil war, that they crept back into town as if they were ashamed. Understanding is now giving way to confusion, and the king will not stop crying, and all of Israel knows about it. A fragile peace, a very young fragile peace, is being threatened. And you guessed it, who steps up to be the voice for the king? Joab, the mighty mentor, but also in this case, the very person that killed his son, Absalom. You can feel the weight of it as you read these verses, 2 Samuel 19, verses 6 through 7. It says, you seem to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that your commanders and troops mean nothing to you. This is warrior talk going on here. It seems that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died, you would have been pleased. Now go out there and congratulate your troops, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not a single one of them will remain here tonight. Then you will be worse off than ever before. I am sure that Joab would have rather delivered flowers. I mean, everybody else was comforting the king, but he needed to be confronted. And again, Joab and David, they had a warrior relationship. So as you read these words, again, have a little bit of theological grace. Yes, Joab is being insensitive, but this is sometimes the way warriors will talk to each other. He is cutting through all of the emotion with nothing but harsh truth, and he lets him know in the very midst of the pain of the moment, he lets him know, if you don't get back into the battle, you're not only going to lose your destiny, but Israel itself may be lost. Israel is hanging on by a thread, and they need their king back. Who gets David back into battle? His mighty mentor, a man he doesn't really want, but he needs, a man named Joab. 2 Samuel 19, verse 8, 9, and 10 says, "So the king went out and took his seat at the town gate." Wow. "And as the news spread throughout the town that he was there, everyone went to him. The people were saying, 'The king rescued us from our enemies and saved us from the Philistines, but Absalom chased him out of the country. Now Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, is dead. Why not ask David to come back and be our king again?'" It was mentorship that got David back on mission. It was mentorship that got the king to move from his mourning and take his place at the seat at the front of the town. It was mentorship that got Israel to follow their king again. Now, this is basic, but so powerful. None of us will ever outgrow our need for mentorship. One of the illustrations I use in this chapter is the ancient practice of cutting the back off of a shirt when somebody learns to be a pilot. This goes all the way back to the days of when planes had two cockpits and the instructor would sit behind the person that's learning. And the plane was so loud that the only way they could really give the person any instructions was to pull and tug on the back of their shirt. So once they became a pilot, it was practice to actually cut the back out and hang it in the hanger so that it was basically a sign saying, "I no longer need to be instructed." They say that some flying schools even still use this practice today. Can I just say today, I will never have the back of my shirt cut out. I will always need somebody tugging on it and pulling on it with the mentorship of God in their heart, and so will you. We will never outgrow mentorship. Now, the gold standard in the Bible when it comes to mentoring has to be Proverbs 27, verse 17. Of course, it says, "As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend." If you look that up in the Hebrew, it actually gives you a picture of like two kinds of steel. One kind of steel would be the type that's made to use a knife, and the other type of steel would be the type that's used to make a file. You don't sharpen a knife with a knife. You have to get something that has a different grain, that has an abrasion to it, and only in the friction, only in the pain of the friction can the knife be sharpened. See, it is a mistake to say, "I want a mentor, but I want them to be exactly like me." No, you need somebody that has a little bit of edge, somebody that has a different grain than you do. We certainly see this in the story of Joab. God uses the abrasiveness of this man at times when the king is least likely to be mentored. This is the man that God sends in, and he uses him to sharpen the king and bring him back to the battle. Another way to look at mentoring from this verse is the anvil of a blacksmith. And we know that as he pounds on that steel, that every single blow is not by accident. And as painful and as violent as it might look, he has in his mind a picture that we cannot see. He has a vision of what's being developed. This is what mentors do. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. "The wounds of a friend can be trusted." Listen, if you only have friends that compliment and never confront, if you only have friends that like to pet you on the back, but they don't have a hammer, they don't have an anvil, they are not willing at times to say what needs to be said, well, then you might need to get some new friends. In the book, I actually talk about how they make Japanese swords. And some of those swords are so detailed that it's soft and hard layers of steel. And they say that up to 30,000 layers can be in one of those beautiful masterpieces. See, it's tough to make a masterpiece that's going to be made into a weapon, and we're never going to be able to do it without mentors. Now, this is a big statement, but I want you to hear it. You will never be the man of God that God has called you to be without a heart of submission towards mentorship. One of my favorite versions of this golden verse of mentorship is Proverbs 27:17, found in the Amplified Classic Bible. I love this so much. It says, "As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. to show rage or worthy purpose. Wow. See, mentorship done right can actually lift the countenance of your life. It pulls you from your defeated attitude and brings you a joy that gets you back into the battles of your life. If that's not how you're experiencing mentorship, then you might need a new mentor. Mentorship done right fills you with a rage towards the worthy purposes of God. In other words, you have this fire, you have this fuel, you have this almost rage of passion to get back into the battles that God has called you to fight. Mentorship, by definition, should be motivational. Now, I'll close right here by saying this. We need to make sure that we never forget the lessons that our mentors teach us. When I was growing up, I was fishing with my dad quite often, and one of the lakes we fished was the largest lake in Illinois called Carlisle Lake. Back then, the depth finders were not the amazing machines that we have today, but they just had this little flashing sonar. And so it would tell you the depth, but that was about it. So to be able to find the sunken islands in that lake where the fish always were, we had to line the boat up with certain towers and trees and landmarks. And I spent many hours watching that little flashing sonar. Dad showed me where all the sunken treasure of the lake was. But if I was to go back there today, to be honest with you, I don't think I could find it. In other words, your mentor can show you where the treasure's at, but it's up to you to mark the map. You've got to remember the value and the power of mentorship. You've got to remember the lessons they teach you. The last moment that David has with Joab is towards the end of his life, and his relationship with this mighty mentor, it kind of ends on a sour note. In fact, his relationship with Joab is so complicated that he actually tells Solomon, his son, before he dies to have him killed, and Solomon actually does. But before all of that, there's a moment in David's kingdom where he decides, for some reason, that he wants to take a census. And Joab warns him against it. He says, this will not please God. And David goes against the advice of his mighty mentor, even though Joab had pulled him out of trouble many other times. Well, there's a plague that comes on Israel, the judgment of God, because David refused to listen to his mentor. Listen, mentorship is only as good as your memory. Our divine responsibility is to remember the lessons that our mentors teach us. So, God is calling many of you today to become a mighty mentor for someone else. Can I just say, you are not really doing the mission of the gospel until your faith is being replicated in other people. The mission of the gospel is to make disciples. Maybe say that word out loud, disciples. A disciple is a disciplined follower of Jesus. A disciple really can't become a disciple unless they have somebody telling them the truths of Jesus, unless they have somebody preaching a gospel that confronts the very sin that's in their life. That's the work of a mentor. I don't know about you, but I want to leave a legacy behind. I want to make sure that my mentorship is powerful enough that spiritual sons and daughters are being raised up. And I know you want that too. So let me pray for you today as you enter into your groups. Father, I pray right now for these men as they enter into discussion. I pray that this topic of mentorship would be so real and so tangible among them. Anoint their conversation by your Spirit in Jesus' name. God bless you guys. Can't wait to see you again in the next session.